We put celebrities and sports stars on such a high pedestal that sometimes we forget that they can do some really bad things. But they do. From Mike Tyson to Michael Vick, here are some of the most famous professional athletes who committed horrible crimes. Starting off with Tommy Kane. The former professional footballer Kane faced a difficult situation when his wife and the mother of his children requested a divorce. Rather than handling the situation in a calm and mature manner, Kane lost control and became violent. He dragged his wife into the kitchen and, with tremendous force, proceeded to bounce her head off the floor. In a fit of rage, he then grabbed a knife and viciously stabbed her in the neck, causing fatal injuries. His actions were a clear breach of the law, and he was charged with manslaughter. The court proceedings were intense, as both sides argued their cases. But in the end, Kane entered into a plea bargain with the prosecution and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. The court acknowledged his history of depression and mental health issues as factors in their decision, but also emphasized the severity of the crime and the need for justice for the victim and her family. Now, this next athlete is a name you've probably heard of. He's one of the most famous boxers of all time, after all, Mike Tyson. In 1991, Tyson, a well-known figure in the sports world, found himself in hot water. He was arrested and charged with the assault of an 18-year-old pageant winner in an Indianapolis hotel room. Tyson vehemently denied the allegations and claimed that the encounter was consensual. But despite his protest, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to 6 years in prison, of which he served less than 3 years.
I think people see that about every 3 months. He's got a side to him.
After his release, Tyson went back to boxing and regained some of his former glory. Over the years, Tyson's conviction has faded into the background for many people. In fact, he was even given a cameo appearance in the hit movie The Hangover in 2009.
Bangkok, Orient the city don't know what the city is getting. The trip girls in the show with everything but you grinning, you know. One night in Bangkok in the woods.
But it's really important to remember that Tyson was convicted of a serious crime, and that his actions have had a lasting impact on the victim. Unfortunately, Mike Tyson isn't the only athlete who was convicted of Jonathan Boyer was too. Jonathan "Jock" Boyer, a former pro cyclist who made history as the first American to compete in the Tour de France, was taken into custody on charges of child molestation. The allegations were that he was sexually involved with a young girl who was only 12 years old. And yet, despite the severity of the crime, Boyer's prison sentence was reduced due to his past athletic achievements, which is really messed up if you think about it. Moving on, Michael Vick was arrested for hosting a dogfighting ring. This was probably the most controversial case in NFL history. Vick was once a highly praised American football quarterback, playing in the National Football League, but his successful career came to a screeching halt in 2007 when he was implicated in a dogfighting ring. He eventually pleaded guilty to the charges and served 21 months in a federal prison. What we learned was that Vick and 3 other individuals were accused of operating an illegal dogfighting operation known as Bad News Kennels.
The moment I was most scared was when I signed on the dotted line to go to prison. I kind of signed away my freedom, and that was tough. It's hard for any individual to say, okay, I'm going to turn myself in and go to jail.
Vick was directly involved in the brutal treatment of the dogs, including drowning or hanging them when they were no longer useful for fighting, or when they became too old. The dogs that were rescued from the property were put up for adoption, and many of them required extensive special care for the rest of their lives.
The first night I bought her 2 beds. Little one we got, it was too small for her, but she loves that bed and she like curls up in a weird position to sleep there.
Now let's go to 70s hockey for this next horrible athlete who committed an equally horrible crime, Craig MacTavish. Craig MacTavish was a promising young hockey player who was drafted by the Boston Bruins in 1978. Tragically, his life took a turn for the worse after a night of drinking at a bar. He got behind the wheel and ended up crashing into another vehicle, killing 26-year-old Kim Radley. Despite her death in the hospital, Craig only faced 1 year in prison after pleading guilty to vehicular manslaughter. Following his release, Craig returned to hockey.
That interest, and that's to bring the highest quality player through the door. And that's certainly an area that has to improve. The coaching, the way that our players are directed, on on and off the ice.
and even received offers from 4 different teams while he was still in prison, but it never brought back the person he killed. And Craig is shockingly not the only athlete who drove under the influence and messed up badly. There's also Leonard Little. Leonard Little was a talented defensive end who played for the St. Louis Rams for 12 years. However, in 1998, during his first season in the NFL, he made a catastrophic mistake by driving drunk and colliding with another vehicle, taking the life of 47-year-old Susan Gutweiler. Despite the severity of the situation, Leonard was only given probation, community service, and a suspension from 8 games. He was able to continue his NFL career the following year. At this point, it's pretty obvious that athletes don't get treated like regular people. They'll do bad things, but they'll hardly get convicted as badly for it because they're so valuable to sports. But thankfully, not all athletes got off the hook so easily. For example, Hardbody Harrison served a life sentence for his crimes. Hardbody Harrison was once a professional wrestler who dreamed of making it big in the ring. However, after his time in the US Army and a short-lived career as a jobber in the WWE, things didn't go according to plan. With his wrestling career no longer an option, Harrison took a dark turn and resorted to a life of crime. He became a pimp, preying on vulnerable women who he would bail out of jail and lure into a life of work. Reports suggest that he not only forced them into this lifestyle, but also subjected them to harsh conditions, making them perform and carry out household chores in his Georgia home. Despite his attempts to disguise this as wrestling training, he was eventually caught and found guilty. He is now serving a life sentence for his crimes. Now, let's highlight a famous athlete in baseball, Denny McLain. Denny McLain was a powerhouse pitcher in Major League Baseball during the 60s and 70s, known for his time with the Detroit Tigers. However, his life after the game grabbed more attention than his playing days. Unfortunately, Denny was involved in a series of criminal activities, including drug trafficking, embezzlement, and racketeering, which eventually landed him behind bars. Moving on, let's talk about Jimmy Johns. Former University of Alabama running back Tyrone Johns had a promising future in football under head coach Mike Shula. However, what many didn't know, including Coach Shula, was that Johns had a secret life as the campus drug dealer. He was eventually caught and sentenced to serve a year in prison. As of now, he may have completed his sentence and be on his way out of jail. Finally, the last professional athlete on our list who committed a horrible crime is none other than Oscar Pistorius. Oscar Pistorius, a former South African sprinter and amputee, was convicted of murder in 2013 for the killing of his girlfriend on Valentine's Day of that year. He claimed that he had mistaken her for an intruder and fired shots through the bathroom door in self-defense, but he was ultimately found guilty of culpable homicide and reckless endangerment. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison at first, but since then, several appeals have affected this, and eventually, his time in prison was increased to 13 years and 5 months. And that's all for today on professional athletes who committed horrible crimes. See you in the next one.